Okay, so hopefully this is going live. Thanks for joining in. Um, so I had a bit of a question someone had left a note on one of the last videos that were like, "You left for several weeks, and we didn't have any of the readings, and now uh, it's kind of confusing." And I think I mentioned when I first started reading this book that the middle part gets a little boggy, but I think overall, in general, the information provided is useful. So we're still probably in sort of the boggy part. So for the people who want sort of a recap about what's actually going on, I'm starting on chapter 25 tonight. This is You Can't Ask Alice Anymore. But essentially, where we are in the book, there's two sort of scenarios. One is the main character, Robert Gu, who is the grandfather who had Alzheimer's that was revived with sort of this nanotechnology. But when he came back, he had been a world renowned poet and sort of an asshole. And so he came back and he sort of lost his knack for poetry and then, but became more mechanically inclined, but he still wanted to be a poet again. And so he went back to school for this sort of vocational retraining, and he met this young guy, Juan Orozco, who was there, and they had sort of helped each other. And Juan was trying to help him sort of get up to speed with technology, and he was trying to help Juan with his writing homework. And in the mix, there was his young granddaughter, Miri. Miri's sort of super smart, and she's trying to wrangle her grandfather, but her grandfather had been sort of an asshole to her. So Robert's son, Bob Jr., he is sort of in high intelligence, sort of cybersecurity, he and his wife, Alice. And sort of as this is all unfolding, there's a drama going on at the University of California, San Diego library, where this person, Huertas, is shredding all of the books of the library with this idea of digitizing them. And that this is the model that they're going to go up and down like all the major libraries and shred all of this physical books. And so there's this sort of, there was a protest movement against that. And Robert, the grandfather, ended up sort of teaming up with some of the old timers in the library. And then they had hatched this idea that somehow they were going to break in through the tunnels in the underground labs and find where Huertas was storing the shredder of the shredded books. And for some reason, they were going to spray it with a glue that would stick it all together and sort of mess up his plans, but then eventually degrade and make the shredding usable again. And Robert was drawn into this plan by this character named Rabbit, who ultimately may end up sort of being an AI, but it's sort of a holographic rabbit. And he is working at behest of this international group of intelligence officials, sort of top secret, led by Alfred Vaz, who is an Indian national in conjunction with Mitsuri, who is Japanese, and this other guy who's German. And they want to get into the biolabs in San Diego because they're concerned that there is this global release of a virus called this "You Gotta Believe Me" virus. So in this sort of climactic couple of chapters, they need an excuse to get all of the staff out of the biolabs. And so what the rabbit hatches is this plan to have some sort of giant spectacle engagement of these belief circles in augmented reality. And so they were going to have these different interest groups in support of the library sort of battling it out in augmented reality on the grounds of the library. And that all of the people, all of the staff in the biolabs are somehow given permission to go be part of this engagement and bring all of their little service robots too. And so all of the little service robots turn into various things in this animated belief circle. Like they've been layered with augmented reality to have this sort of epic battle on the grounds of the UCSD library. And meanwhile, all these people are watching and are there virtually, and some of them are there physically. And while this is all going on, the oldsters are sneaking through the tunnels, trying to get ostensibly to the shredder. But at some point, Alfred Vaz, who is has hired the rabbit to do all of this, there's something he needs done in the biolab to protect his secret experiment, because it turns out he's not actually about shutting down this "You Gotta Believe Me" virus. He really thinks that he's going to implement this virus all on his own to control the world and bring peace, which, as we know now, like it sort of loops back to the whole global brain project. And I just got my Oliver Reiser Cosmic Humanism book today, so we'll know more about that later. But it seems like Alfred Vaz is in the sort of systems theorist, we shall all have peace by being part of the global brain project, and that he might be planning to use one of these "you've got to believe me" viruses to make everybody go along with the plan. So that's sort of what happened the last time. The oldsters were in the tunnels. They were being chased by the granddaughter, Miri, who was worried about her grandfather. And she was there with Juan, Robert Gu's sort of high school sidekick from the vocational school. And they confronted Alfred in trying to get down into the tunnels. And Alfred knocked Juan out. And I don't think he's dead, but he's sort of incapacitated. And in the tunnels, there's very little connectivity. So the granddaughter, Mary, had been communicating with her grandmother, Robert's ex-wife, and this other woman who is sort of was also brought back from Alzheimer's and is very smart mechanically. And so, and her Mary's grandmother's roommate. So they were in communication with these groups through silent messaging, but then when they were down in the tunnels, they lost the connectivity. So that's sort of where things are now. Hopefully that helps people understand what's going on. And meanwhile, okay, so while all of this is going on, Mary's parents and Robert Gu's son, daughter-in-law and son are the cyber security officials who are overseeing, the operations that night. So they are technically involved, although they don't know that their whole family is enmeshed in what's unfolding here in this scenario. And Alice is sort of a super qualified cyber sleuth person. And she's been undergoing massive amounts of this just-in-time training, which you're not really supposed to do because it totally messes up your brain and makes you crazy. But evidently she's very solid. But she might be sort of falling apart because she's done this just-in-time training like 11 times. And so she's not herself anymore. And her husband is worried about that. And her daughter is too. So I'm thinking this chapter 25 is called "You Can't Ask Alice Anymore." And Alice is the daughter-in-law who's done the cyber stuff. So Braun to Mitsuri Vaz, this is the messaging. "By damn, Homeland Security will respond to this. Has Mr. Rabbit gone mad?" Closed message. Mitsuri to Braun and Vaz. "He claims that his library dance will only trigger FBI intervention and altogether give us more time." Closed message. Braun to Mitsuri Vaz. "Okay, I have the complete dump from our inspection equipment. God willing, that's everything we need to prove what's been going on in these labs." Closed message. Alfred was already working through the exit checklist. He had fooled his friends, but what of his attack on Alice Gong? If she was still functioning, it might not matter what he did. FBI requests clearance to take charge of the riot area. "On what grounds?" Bob Goose spoke without looking away from the library. Even the unfudged video was remarkable. This was a 1900s concrete behemoth, originally as dumb as snot, and yet it had moved without collapsing. Now, in this scenario, the library starts to dance around the building itself, and it's because of like the earthquake underpinnings of it, but they've hijacked the system to, instead of earthquakes, to make it look like it's bouncing around. "The grounds are the frank evidence of violation of federal law, namely," a string of legal references spewed across Bob's vision. "FBI argues that this is effectively an attack on a federal building." Bob hesitated. There were criminal violations here, though UCSD had made no formal complaint. At this point, there was no watch-related service FBI could render. They would simply be law enforcement. The watch priority was his priority, and that was to snoop and swoop, snoop and then swoop. What might this disorder be a cover for? He glanced at the biolab status. Still all green, and finally he replied, "Request denied." There is an ongoing Homeland Security investigation here. However, given the first layer of our analysis to San Diego Police and Rescue and the UCSD Campus Police, be prepared to support emergency networking. Layer 1 to SDPD and Campus Police. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Bob's eyes turned to the library. It was still standing, but this was damn dangerous foolishness. His analyst pool certainly thought so. In the last 30 seconds, the node structure had come close to turning inside out. And for the moment, Alice let the engineers dominate. The text clouds were full of gibber about how the library could walk, had been accomplished, and the dangers there might be for the people in and around it. USMC nodes were lodged deep in the discussions, his own people thoroughly caught up in the excitement. and that was not acceptable. Bob leaned forward and spoke. All squads, move to launch alert. The chances of an actual launch were still near zero, but this would get his people into their assault craft. More important, it got their attention. The USMC nodes moved away from all the speculation and into the tight coordination of Marines in a launch prep. Bob stared at the distracted analyst pool for a moment more. Alice was already drawing them away from the library. The structural engineers were no longer the center of the tangle. The library had walked. So what might that be covering? His Marine's duty was to guard against the deadliest grand surprises. For instance, were the biolabs still secure? And what was going on in the rest of Conus Southwest? He turned and jogged out of his bunker into the narrow tunnel that led to his own launcher. The analyst display followed along, hanging just to his right. Alice had grabbed another 1,500 analysts, more bioscience and drug research people. The ceiling curved low at the end of the tunnel. His assault craft was a tiny vehicle, its design a compromise between time to target and the desire to make local combat manager invisible. From the ingress tunnel, all that was visible of it was the open hatch and a portion of the dead black fuselage. He settled into his place, but he did not zip up. What is Alice doing? He watched the analyst pool grow, now larger for most worldwide operations. But all the attention was on the bioscience labs around UCSD. True, the situation was strange. Even though lab security was still in the green, the staff was topside in the riot. And that just justified some attention. But it also made lab surveillance even easier. Damn, now Alice was stealing analyst tasks with cargo tracking throughout the Conus Southwest. Squelching your top analyst with a black mark on everyone, but there was no help for it. Even in combat, this sort of monomania would be bizarre. As it happened, Alice acted first. Emergency flags came up in every view. The assault craft's launch hatch slid shut and his acceleration pod zipped tight. Launch, 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 flashed in his eyes, and a launch clock appeared, counting down from 30 seconds. This was analyst preemption, the sort of drama that happens when analysts realize that their own forces are about to be nuked in their bunkers. Everything would go at once and sort itself out mid-flight. But the analyst pool showed no such threat. The launch target was UCSD. The G-pod was inflating tight around him. The countdown clock showed 25 seconds. He brought up a view of his top analyst. Alice, advise reason for launch. Alice's eyes were wide. It's very simple. Onset was slow, but now insight has saturated. This one is undergoing threatful integration. Neuromodulator pathway, GAT77, has been subverted. Signaling cascade has too many control points for MCOG analysis, but reference, some kind of RXIV pointer, demonstrates progression. She frowned at him, and suddenly she was shouting, "Don't you understand? This one is failing. Conformational changes are preventing adaptive response. This one, 10 seconds to launch." Alice Goo's medicals were off the chart. 8 seconds to launch. Bob override the launch order and relieved his top analyst. Stand down, stand down, stand down. The G-pod relaxed around him. He scarcely noticed. Alice's head was down, but she was still talking desperate. Drool spattered her blouse, and he couldn't notice that either. He promoted her to second in analysis. He promoted her second in analysis, a CIA spook who'd been far too passive tonight. But then what could one do when a star like Alice crashed? The spook was trying her best. "I'll have us up in 2 minutes, sir." In the meantime, Bob Koo was blinded, and the watch was just a mob of bright people watching a million data feeds. One of those feeds was medical. Alice had suffered a JITT stick, the most violent and sudden of her career. Despite all her desperation to communicate, she was stuck in molecular biology. The CIA analyst was back. "Sir, are you all right?" I'm fine." Bob considered the analyst's display. The spook had hung the operation off the rest of the CONUS watches. There was a close backup now. Big chunks of Alice's network were improperly connected, but the spook was healing it, forcing connections and possible correlations. Maybe she was still too heavy on UCSD. She seemed to think that Alice's last words pointed to enemy action there. Okay, after everything else tonight, that had to be followed up. "I'm fine." Over the past 12 weeks, Rabbit had learned a lot. He had grown, you might say, and tonight it all came together. Topside, the riot was at climax. Better than sex could ever be, Rabbit was sure. I am the reality arm of the Scoochie belief circles. Yeah. There were surprises, too. The affair had called into existence, or simply into his notice, a creature who might be his equal. Rabbit had played both sides through the first part of the riot, but now dangerous knowledge had been taken over by something very creative, something who was having as much fun tonight as Rabbit himself. So he had millions of new affiliates, and some of them as capable as a human could ever be, and he'd found a special friend to boot. His riot fully outclassed the espionage hugger mugger it was designed to protect. It was amusing that despite the carrot greens and all the other generous clues Rabbit had provided, Alfred and company had not realized whence his powers came or how great they were. But something told Rabbit that in the long run, what was happening underground was important too. Alfred was playing out his mysterious game down there, and now was the time Rabbit had planned to figure out just what Alfred was looking for. Hey, and maybe get a piece of it. Now was the time, but Rabbit was locked out. Damn, Alfred. The fiber link was behind Alfred's millnet. Short of tipping off DHS and destroying the wonderful jape Rabbit had so carefully planned, Rabbit was balked. But what did Alfred's Millnet talk to? Why, just a few thousand very clever Indo-European analysts. And they didn't get to be so clever by hiding in government holes. They each had their own creative lives. Rabbit hopped from Brussels to Nice to Mumbai to Tokyo and Natch. Listened to his own inner self, and now he needed to think about it. He saw how the tricks he had used with American security might be applied. Rabbit tweaked 1,000 affiliances, and he listened to a million conversations that he really had no intention of consciously reviewing. One last piece of SHE magic. And voila, Rabbit was into the millnet. And he zipped down through Alfred's stealthed aerobot, and once again he was in Vaz's glorious command center in Piltner Hall. Rabbit took a look at the medicals on the Orozco kid, still alive. Old Alfred wasn't a monster except when principle demanded it. What was he after? And can I get some? Rabbit tiptoed down Alfred's connections into the labs. No surprise, Alfred Vaz was making good use of the devices Rabbit's little friends had planted in the Gen area, sending oodles of data out to his colleagues in Japan and the EU. Rabbit watched quietly. One doesn't ask pointed questions when one is trying to be invisible. He captured the raw encryption, noted what was talking to, and what was within Alfred's Gen domain. Even so, it didn't make sense. The exported data did not match what was locally observed, and then suddenly a big light bulb went off in Rabbit's mind. Alfred was not searching for anything. He was making sure his alliance friends did not see what was already there. Alfred, you old devil, running your own program on American equipment and keeping it secret from everybody. And what could be worth such secrecy and such a wild-ass cover-up? Figuring that out was still a guessing game. But Rabbit was the grand master of guessing, better than any Indo-European analyst pool, better even than Alice Gu and all her analysts. Oops. Something told me Alice was in deep trouble. Rabbit had dutifully played messenger boy for Alfred's mysterious snooping on Alice, and that must have been the setup for Alice's downfall. But how had he done it? And suddenly, the underground was more intriguing than ever. The heart of Alfred's research empire was in a corner of the molecular biology of cognition area. The data from everywhere else was truthful reporting on innocent proprietary research. Rabbit looked more carefully at the lies coming out of the MCOG area. The phrase animal model leaked from gaps in the encryption. Animal model. Animal model. The term usually referred to animals possessing an analog of some human condition, usually a disease to cure. And somehow Rabbit didn't think Alfred was trying to cure anything. And there were lots of animals on the MCOG area. Of course, most were bugs, gallons of fruit flies, and every itsy-bitsy one labeled and probed. Rabbit dipped into some of the local databases, and it looked like Alfred was messaging with YGBM. That's, you gotta believe me. But the details were not easy to understand. Rabbit was not always fast. For hard problems, he was like lesser beings. He had to sleep on the question, and then in the morning, the old intuition would deliver remarkable insights. In this case, tomorrow would be too late. 5 minutes from now might be too late. Alfred's show was almost over, and with it, access to the snooper nodes, and heck, the gadgets would probably fry themselves. Rabbit hesitated and listened to his inner self. He had a gut feeling about this. Modern intelligence services existed to prevent terrorism, but Alfred, with whatever he was creating here, the DeWitt might proceed beyond grand terror into realms no man was meant to go. So maybe I should just call DHS. I mean, even without Alice Goo, they could shut down Alfred in 5 minutes. Rabbit gave the possibility the serious thought it deserved, about 2 seconds worth, and then a big grin spread across his concept of a face. Rabbit was full of ideas, and there was one that had been pounding on him since the moment he'd broken into Alfred's mill net. Besides having the greater intellect, I now have the physical advantage. Alfred was on the scene with very low latency, very high bit rates, no more hard data. Nevertheless, he was stuck in his little room, and all but one of his mechs were topside. But the Elder Cabal was still down in the labs. True, they were not in the Gengen area, but they were still reachable at the end of a fiber link. And hello, what's this? The slightly overweight Chinese ninja princess. She was definitely not part of the original plan, but bless her, there she was. What a strange and marvelous girl. Back to business. He was already preparing contingency plans, contingency documents, and if I'm very careful, very quiet, I can sneak out along the fiber, tell Robert and Winnie and Carlos and Tommy the right stories, and then I'll have my own physical hands. What Alfred was planning might go beyond grand terror, but that same power in my hands, well, that could be glorious fun. So that's chapter 25. I'm just going to take a little drink of coffee. Okay, next chapter. How to survive the next 30 minutes PDF. I told you my planning would pay off, didn't I? Tommy Parker stood knee-deep in the remains of the library book collection. The Shredda towered behind him like dirty snow, flakes as big as your hand. They had found the librarium storage at the backs of Max Huerta's cavern, just where Tommy had said. It was stored in rows of sturdy cargo containers labeled rescued data. That's the shredded books of the library. The containers had been no match for Tommy's cutter. He had flooded the floor with the contents of A-BX. This had been most of the fifth floor stacks. It seems so much smaller when it's in shreds, thought Robert. Tommy waved at the drifts of shredded paper. You guys ready to start with the glue? This will jam Huertas' operation up the wazoo. And where's your reporter guy? I haven't seen Sharif in a while. He went around handing out spray cans. Finally, he seemed to notice his pal's silence. We don't really need Sharif, do we? I mean, we've got our own record. He lifted the laptop in its sling. Robert looked at Carlos and Winston, and Winnie gave a little shake of his head. So none of them had heard from the mysterious stranger. Sure, Tommy, Robert said. That will be fine, Professor Parker, Sharif's voice from Tommy's laptop. Perhaps you could have Professor Goo act as a cameraman. They untangled the laptop from its sling, and the voice directed Robert around to the side. So this is the graduate student that's been mirroring Robert and working on his graduate thesis, who is present as a virtual presence in the laptop. They untangled the laptop from its sling, and the voice directed Robert around to the side. The voice was very picky about where it wanted the laptop pointed, across the edge of the Shredda, almost in line with their path into this vacant hall. And then Robert noticed letters painting silently across his field of view. It was SMING, that's silent messaging, and the letters were green. Mysterious stranger to Robert. So this guy, the graduate student, his presence gets taken over by other entities in the metaverse, so he must be taken over at this point. That's the mysterious stranger. Mysterious stranger to Robert. Hey, my man. Mysterious stranger to Robert. Be discreet. We don't want Alfred to know I've come back to help you. Close message. Alfred, thought Robert, but he kept quiet. No one else seemed to notice the stranger's arrival. Tommy walked back into the drifts of paper, tossing them up in the air and squirting them with his spray gun. Is the camera getting this, Robert? Robert looked down at the laptop screen. Yes. Any other time, the effect of Tommy's aerosol glue would have been a showstopper. He threw another armful of loose shredded in the air and sprayed a mist of glue. Where mist and paper met, the paper fragments were suddenly tumbling as one. The mass drifted slowly down to earth, and most of the frags never actually touched the ground, but hung permanently in the air. Tommy laughed and pushed away at the hazy something. The ensemble of scattered papers rocked back and forth like bits of fruit in invisible jello. Tommy whooped. Try it yourselves, just don't squirt each other. He threw another armful up and another. Arches of paper and mist grew around him. Robert hung back, playing cameraman. Mysterious stranger to Robert. Look where Alfred has you pointing the camera. See the light coming out of the dark? Closed message. There was a tiny pool of light, someone running down the steps into the Huertas cavern. It was Mary. The girl came pounding across the floor, shouting, Robert, Robert! Tommy and the others turned to watch open-mouthed, and Mary came from the edge of the shredder. She was gasping for breath. Winston looked her up and down and then looked at Robert. This is another goo, isn't it? My granddaughter. I thought we agreed to keep this among ourselves. Winnie's glare was as good as any high-tech messaging. You're going to ruin this for all of us. But Tommy was more astounded than any of them. How could she get through security? The cops should be all over. No, no. Mary managed to speak between gasps. Must call police. The laptop had it say too. Pay no attention to this child. Remember why you are here. Robert shoved the laptop at Winnie and reached for Mary. How'd you find us, kiddo? Her arms went around his middle. It was Juan and me and she hesitated, looking at him with her eyes wide. Gone was her usual assurance. Horror looked out. Somebody's using you, Robert. I think maybe they killed Juan. Not so, said the laptop. The voice hesitated. Mysterious stranger to Robert. Hey, Alfred put forget it gas in your belt boxes, and now he's wondering why you're still standing. Close message. Gentlemen, the voice resumed, I'll advise you to remember while you are really here. Tommy had come out from his fountains of paper. His spray can dangled unnoticed from his fingers. He looked at Carlos and Winston and Robert. Yes, what is it we're supposed to remember? Why are we really here? Carlos and Winnie wouldn't look at him in the eye, and Carlos mumbled something in Mandarin. We did what we thought was right, Winston said. Yes, each our own vision of what was right, but Juan murdered? He looked back at Tommy. We tricked you, Tommy. Someone else is behind this. Tommy walked back to the pile, kicked aimlessly at his masterpiece, but I thought I had my touch back. He glanced at Mary and seemed to be putting together all the inconsistencies, and his shoulders slumped. Okay, I was an old idiot. Who was boosting me along, Robert? I don't know. Mysterious stranger to Robert. I could tell you. Maybe I will someday. Closed message. Apparently, Winnie and Carlos were not seeing the sming. Mary's chin came up. We've got to get word out. And the laptop said, it's not safe to move. Stay where you are. Mysterious stranger to Robert. Actually, I would recommend the same, but right now I'm peeved with Alfred. Do what you please, my man. Close message. Tommy Parker looked off into the emptiness of Huertas cavern. He was shaking his spray can, almost an idle gesture. The gear we planted in Gen. I thought I made that, me. The big genius. But it could be anything. Bombs, poison, some kind of takeover hardware. But we're at the north edge of the complex. He waved at the wall that loomed from the dimness just beyond the shredder containers. That overlooks Sorrento Valley. There are some old entrances. We could have used them instead, except my research said the alarms would be harder to disable. But now I don't care if busting through them sets off alarms. Stay where you are, said the laptop. You are surrounded by lethal weapons. Something small and black sidled out of the darkness. I saw one of those on Gilman Drive. Mary took a step toward it. The robot turned toward her. There was a metallic click that sounded very much like a round being chambered. Mary? Robert held her arm, but Tommy was coming around the other side, and the robot turned toward him. Parker stopped about 7 feet from the critter. Some of his old cockiness returned. I'll bet it's just a network superiority bot. Most of the payload is communications and counter node gear. It's not much use at all by itself. There are hundreds on the floor, said the laptop. Don't force us to act. Mary slipped loose of Robert. I didn't see any others, she said, moving closer to the robot. Mysterious stranger to Robert. There's only the one, but close message. And then several things happened at once. Robert pulled Mary behind him. Tommy stepped forward in a fencer's lunge that brought his spray can within reach of the mech. The robot flipped up like a sprung rat trap. Tommy screamed and fell forward. And Robert ran toward the robot, and it grabbed hard air. And the hardened froth was barely visible, but it held the robot beyond his reach. And he spun the gel around, looking for some point closer to the enemy. There! He slammed the carapace into the concrete floor. Again, it was in pieces now, each embedded in the mist. And there was a sound of tiny motors whining to be free. And then Mary and Carlos were stomping on what remained, and sparks flew within the mist, and Robert felt a tingling that raised the hair on his arms. And then the robot was just dead composites, the pieces hanging motionless in blocks of invisible fluff. The only sound was Tommy gasping, and Winnie had rolled the little guy on his side, and Tommy's face was bluish, his mouth gasping a grimace of pain. What happened, Tommy? Parker's back arched. Bastard, fried my pacemaker. Carlos was on his knees. He touched Tommy's shoulder. Women Shazay Lang Jiren. We killed the robot, Dr. Parker. Tommy grunted acknowledgement even as he rocked back and forth on the ground. We'll get you out of here, Tommy, said Blount. We looked up, Robert. No more games. Mysterious stranger to Robert. Oh, damn. Parker was such an interesting wannabe. Okay, I'll help you get him out. And if you help me after that, I can make good on my part of the bargain. How's that? Close message. Robert looked past the greenish letters and nodded to Winston Blount. No more games. Tommy lay twisting in pain. His voice came out between spasms. Key card in my pocket. Mysterious stranger to Robert. Hey, magical me, that ancient key card will actually work. My little surprise present for Alfred. Close message. The voice from the laptop. Alfred was silent. Carlos looked down at where the laptop sat on the concrete floor. We should break this. It's the eye of the enemy. Mary walked around the antique computer. I think if we pull the plug on that fiber thing, the bad guys are gone. Yeah, unplug it. Mysterious stranger to Robert. Hey, wait, where do you think I'm coming from? So what if Alfred can still snoop? It's me you need. If you cut me off, then well, damn, I'll have to close message. Mary picked up the laptop and turned it on its edge. She studied the unfamiliar physical connections for a moment and then reached down. Mysterious stranger to Robert. I hate Mary. Close message. And popped the optical fiber out of the laptop. And for a moment, they grinned at each other like idiots. Tommy squeezed out a weak laugh. We're off the leash. And he gasped for a few seconds. Gotta carry me, guys. Sorry, I'll show you the exit. Winnie looked down at Tommy. We'll get you out, Tommy. You'll be okay. He lifted Parker under the shoulders and then reached to support him under the knees. Parker didn't weigh that much, but Blount was staggering. Robert reached out. I can carry him, Winnie. Blount glared back, and Robert shut up. And then Winnie's hand slipped, and Tommy almost crashed to the ground. I got him. Mary ran around Blount and slipped her hands under where he was holding Tommy's left arm. Winnie didn't object, and maybe it was because she didn't ask. And Robert took both legs, and they started off along the wall. Carlos followed, carrying the cutter and what other gear might still be of use. Nothing more followed, nothing they could see. For what it might be worth, Robert's dumb little waste box showed only utility glimmers in the empty cavern. Tommy's breathing was a raspy wheeze, and every few paces he twisted within their grasp. About 100 yards more, he shuddered and went limp. Tommy, Winston hesitated, bringing them almost to a halt. Keep going. And then after a moment, so our librarian protest was fraud from the beginning, huh? I don't know, Tommy. I knew it was silly, but it seemed worthwhile. Blount looked across at Robert. I thought it would lead to something. I really want... Me too, said Carlos, his voice faint. And in the end, Sharif, whoever, got to all of us, didn't he? All but Tommy. Mary was watching the back and forth silently, but her eyes were wide. Well, she had earned the right to listen. Robert said, so what did he promise you, Winston? Winston's lips pulled back from his teeth. I sure as hell won't tell you. He hesitated, and the snarl became a twisted smile. But I bet I know what your deal with the devil was. And when Robert didn't reply, Blount's smile broadened and he continued, "You try to disguise it, Goo, all the times we met in the library, and never once did you pull your old tricks. At first, I just figured you were setting me up for one of your extreme traps. And after I learned about Sharif, I thought maybe you were running him." Winnie laughed, "but then I began to suspect the truth. You've lost your killer edge, the way you could look inside people and see what would hurt them the most, and then do it to them. You've lost that, haven't you, Robert?" Robert lowered his head. "Yes." The word came out softly, without anger, almost a sigh. "And I bet you can't write poetry anymore, either." "It's the poetry I want back, Winnie." "Oh." Tommy twisted in their grasp, trying to suck in breath. "Shut up. The north gate should be in the next 100 feet." And they walked in silence, eyes straining for some sign on the unmarked wall. And now that Robert was looking, he saw something else. No more green lettering, but a blinking icon that meant pending mail. One last message before Mary had cut the fiber link. Almost without thinking, he shifted his grip on Tommy's leg and tapped a go-ahead on his waist box. A PDF. By God, he hadn't seen anything like that since his teaching days. The table of contents floated in the air above him. The critic in him couldn't resist scanning down the page. The table of contents was impeccably formatted with perfect spelling, at least if you ignored context. The bullet headers were a mishmash of unparalleled constructions and grammatical infelicities. It looked as if it had been thrown together by a gang of paraliterates in a hell of a hurry. But what it said was important. "While we are out of touch," or "How to survive and prosper during the next 30 minutes. Your friend, the mysterious stranger." Dedication. "To the idiots among you who cut the fiber link. Now Alfred can't see you, but I am cut off. Hence, I am breaking my stealthy cover and shipping down this bolus of bits before Mary pops the connector." Executive summary. None provided. Table of contents. Introduction, page 4. How to use this document. Chapter 1, Saving Tommy Parker, page 1. The Huertas back door, the key card that should not work, but does. Chapter 2, Your Benighted Wearables, page 3. Not really Echo in Paraguay, unfortunately for you. The knockout gas, but I already told you about that. What you can and cannot trust about these gadgets. Chapter 3, What Alfred is up to, page 5. And why you really don't want Alfred to succeed. The animal model, or world domination out of little fruit flies, grows. Why calling 911 is not fast enough to stop him. If you don't believe me, just show this file to Mary. Chapter 4, What you can do to help, page 13. Map of Huertas territory. Map of Gen MCOG arrays. Alfred owns this territory, network-wise, but I'm there too. How to get back to the MCOG arrays. What you can do to defeat Alfred. Come be my hands in this glorious struggle. Chapter 5, What's in it for you? Page 21. Promises made up and promises kept. With your helping hands, I can still deliver. Appendix A, page 23. Neat stuff that will impress the Department of Homeland Security and which may make life easier after your arrest. Appendix B, page 117. Wow. So page 23 is Appendix A and Appendix B starts at page 117. Okay. Why Scoochamoot should be the library's lord and mascot. Robert looked at Mary. She was concentrating on holding up Tommy's shoulder. For the moment, all her nerdly interests seemed far away, but we need the nerd as much as ever. Robert to Mary. File type PDF. Send. And he pushed the stranger's file across to her. Tommy did his best to count Winnie's paces, but there were distractions. There was this rock concert playing in Tommy's chest, and every screech of the beat sent fire across his shoulders and down his arms. This wasn't a real heart attack. This was just his pacemaker falling into wild chaos. The last few years, Tommy had been too envious of other people's diddling medical miracles. So what if his vascular system was falling apart? The pacemaker would keep him going till classic science fictional immortality arrived. But now all his plans for living forever were in trouble. Count the paces, count the paces. And there would be seconds when the pain would let up and his heart would be a butterfly flutter in his chest. And for a few seconds, his thoughts would be clear, and then he would black out. And they were carrying him still, though the ride was bumpy. Old Robert was shifting around like he had business with the box on his belt. Okay, stop, he whispered. He would have shouted, but the whisper was all he had now. They heard him, and when he was lying on the cold concrete, hard concrete, Winston's voice came down from high above him. So where is the door? I see. Sounds of Winston fumbling with the key card. Something big slid aside, and there was a wall of faint light, maybe the night sky. He felt a cool breeze on his face. The sound of the freeway was like a distant surf. No alarms, said Winston. Maybe silent alarms? He managed to wheeze. This exit had been such a wild-ass escape option in his original plan. Winston was a shadow against the sky. He was tapping at his keypad. I got 911, Tommy. Now he was talking to someone Tommy could not hear, telling them about a man down with a heart attack. They're on the way, Tommy. They want your med log. The rock concert was back, whacking a new tune in his chest. Bet. Med log is fried. He twisted onto his elbows. There were more important things. Tell them about the labs win. I told them. I just called 911 myself. That was Robert's granddaughter. Her feet were right beside his head, and now she stepped away and became a second shadow beside Winston. She turned this way and that, the way kids do when they're playing games with their wearables. I don't like this, she said after a moment. You heard the highway patrol, kid. Winston's voice was tight, like he was worried as hell. They're sending a car. We just have to sit tight for a few moments. Tommy's pacemaker was working upward to the next crescendo. Okay, give a few seconds and the pain would lessen, or maybe this time his heart would break. The girl's words floated in and out of hearing. Is an emergency. They should airlift. And the net is screwy, and I can't route to my friends, not even a sming. I think someone spoofed the local nodes, and Tommy rolled from side to side, pain blotting out the rest of the sentence. Someone was cradling his shoulders. Carlos, it'll be okay. Professor Parker. The voice turned away from him. I'm having some access problems too, but the error messages make sense. I think the library riot is soaking up too much resource. The little girl's voice was scornful. So much that I can't even sming? What about the laser direct to the freeway? That was Robert. The girl's shadow repeated the strange little dance. I can't quite reach it from here. She was silent for a moment. We're just playing into that bad guy's hands. Here, take a look at this PDF. Winston again. There will be a car. If one doesn't show up in 5 minutes, we'll carry Tommy down the hill ourselves. Tommy's heart had stopped. No, it was back in butterfly mode. He'd have a few seconds of clarity. The girl was probably right, but there was no way he was going down that hill. The others should go to see if they could get far enough to put out a real alarm. Or maybe they should go back into the lab and give the enemy a big surprise. Darkness was rising inside him. In a moment or two, this would not be his problem, and his friends were too stupid to leave him here. Maybe he could set some of them loose. Listen to me. But Tommy's words came out scarcely louder than a sigh. Guys, we gotta split up. And then darkness took him. So that's chapter 26. I'm going to do one more tonight. The revocation attack. Okay. Zhu Zhang looked out from their car at the dark hillsides. I feel pretty useless, Lena. So Lena is Robert Gu's ex-wife in the retirement home. That's Rainbow's End, is the retirement home. You feel useless, Lena Gu shifted irritably in her wheelchair. Their plan had been a mobile presence across the places where Robert was most likely to show up. Tonight they would be on the scene and no one could balk them. Instead, all the action was elsewhere. Even the transportation was uncooperative, operating under special event rules in all areas near UCSD. Their car was moving as slowly as they could make it go, but in another 30 seconds, it would reach the south end of this old bit of asphalt, at which point, no matter how loudly they demanded otherwise, it would turn left. Sorry. At the little T intersection away from the hillside and take them back to the freeway. And then, if they wished, it would drive north to the Ted Williams Expressway, turn and come down here still again. Sorry. Maybe I should have made it just 2 chapters. All right, gonna keep going. Zhu stared into the dark of the hillside and saw nothing. I practiced so much and I still can't make my contacts work right. Those are the wearables. Lena said, actually, there isn't a whole lot to see here. This hillside has to be the dumbest public land near campus. There was some real light. It silhouetted the hilltops and lit the low overcast around the library. Insanity still reigned. A few minutes earlier, Lena had guided Zhu through some of the views. Celebration, riot, whatever it was, the network stats were impressive. And now Zhu couldn't see any of it. Okay, I confess defeat. She reached into the backpack on the floor by her feet. The backpack contained her shop class projects. She had told herself they might come in handy tonight. How she couldn't really imagine, but the gadgets did prove that Zhang could still create. There was something useful here, even if it wasn't one of her gadgets. She pulled out her view page, sat back, and enjoyed the clunky comfort of its old-fashioned interface. What a fall from grace this was, but just now she was too nervous for epiphany. Lena abruptly said, "We have more audio from Juan." The boy's voice was almost a whisper. "We're still in Pilcher Hall. We're waiting for Mary's grandpa to come back from the basement." Mary's voice came out faintly to the microphone. "They're not doing anything." "Let me talk to Mary," said Lena. Zhu listened to the two for a moment. They couldn't get any video, and Mary's epiphany had suffered a 330 error. Zhu had looked up at that. 330 was a catch-all code for a system deadlock caused by licensing conflicts. Meanwhile, all they had were listening to these very occasional, very brief voice messages through Juan. "Gotta go," whispered Juan, and the session was ended. Lena was silent a moment, just watching the familiar dark landscape slide by. "I want to see those kids. They're needing a smart grilling. Any chance the link was faked?" Juan is a careful boy. It would be almost impossible to fake his epiphany cert. Lena humrumped. "As far as I can tell, that was their voices, but talking in whispers and not saying much except everything is boringly safe." It was strange. If the children needed stealth and a low bit rate, that they had not used silent messaging. Maybe someone thought they could fool a pair of old ladies. In fact, with Juan's wearable, I could fake sessions like this. She glanced at Lena. "Maybe you should call in the Marines, Bob and Alice." "Yes, but if it's a small emergency, they can't do anything more than you or I. And if it's a big emergency, well, they might have to do something awful." Lena hummed a few bars of something nervous. "And Mary says everything is fine, just fine." "Maybe we should call the police." "Ha! Nowadays, you don't have to call the police. They just happen to you." Lena was staring at the hillside, her fingers trembling against her lips. The last couple of months, Lena Gu had been such a reliable source of certainty. What if we both wimped out, Zhu thought. Now that was a frightening idea, and she tried to think of something really forceful to say. Your ex has been doing nothing for almost half an hour. Don't you think that's too long?" Lena's head, oh gosh, this is long. This is a long chapter. Just looking to see how many pages. Oh, it's not that bad. Okay. Lena's head bowed, and she said softly, almost to herself, "Oh, Robert, you're up to something terribly stupid, aren't you?" She stared into the dark. "Let's give Mary 5 more minutes, and then we'll call 911. Okay. They tooled along the valley floor slowly enough that the windows could slowly roll down. The resinous scent of manzanita drifted in, and on their left was southbound Highway 5, a lightless torrent of fast-moving vehicles edged by the blaze of manual lanes. On their right were steep, dark hills, violet light flickering along the ridge lines. Zhang brought up a local network view, looked back and forth between that and the physical world. Their little automobile was speeding up again. A pleasant male voice spoke within the passenger cabin. "This portion of Valley Bottom Drive is misfunctioning. You may return after 10 a.m. tomorrow." "What? Now we can't even go back?" "There has to be some override, Zhu." Zhang shook her head. This would be their last drive through here tonight. Zhu had helped design the hardware security layer. It solved so many problems. It made the internet safe and a workable system. And now she was its victim. She thought again of the bag of tricks that sat on the floor beside her. She had spent the whole semester building those gadgets, her mechanical daydreams, maybe. "Zhu, traffic." Lena was pointing up the hillside. Zhu leaned over and looked out. Lena's side. She saw 2 spears of light that just now were turning away from them. "It looks like a car on manual, or maybe it was an on automatic but driving on an unimproved roadway." It must be the service road. Lena paused, and a map appeared on Zoo's view page showing the road that they hadn't been able to get on, the road that led to Huertas's old back entrance. The lights turned back toward them and then disappeared behind an outcropping. Zoo's view page didn't even show a nav marker for the other vehicle. What are they up to? Said Lena. Their own car was almost at the T intersection. Car, said Lena, turn right. Sorry, that is not an existing road. The only legal turn is left. Turn right, turn right. I'm sorry. I have you in a safe traffic in less than 5 minutes. Please think about giving me an ultimate destination. Zoo bet herself that the company Logic had decided it was dealing with a DUI customer, and if they didn't come up with something sensible, the vehicle would take them all the way back to Rainbow's End. Lena sucked in a breath. We're so close. Wait, I got a ping response. It's from Thomas Parker's outfit. They are up there. And then much louder. Hey, car, I want to speak to your supervisor. I mean, a human being. Certainly. 20 seconds, please. 20 seconds would put them past the T intersection. Lena Goose seemed to shrink down in her wheelchair. Her gaze swept back and forth between the hillside and the approaching intersection. We've got to stop them, Zoo. I'll wager they could tell us what's going on. You come out from behind cover, let you know who see you? I'd lurk in the background. But the question was moot. The intersection was just 50 yards ahead, and in a few seconds, they'd turn left and be conveyed ignominiously away. Or maybe not. Zoo lifted her backpack onto the seat beside her, and she picked up the curved tube with the can of diamond flakes she had improved her first shop class project out of all resemblance to the original transport tray. This new model was very much designed with destruction in mind. Sometimes you needed to get the machine's attention, and she knelt on the back-facing seat and set the tip of the cutter against the dashboard. Given Robert Goo's example, she had a good idea of what to expect. Oops, Lena, scrunch down. Lena looked at the tube in Zoo's hands. Yes! And she laughed, even as she tried to flatten herself out of Zhang's way. Zoo pressed the start button, a real physical button, and a roar ripped through the cabin. Her transport tray, now a very fine accelerator, drove 3,000 diamond flecks into the dashboard every second. The recoil was a soft, steady push. It was easy to keep the tip pointed. Some of the diamonds bounced up, embedding in the acoustic ceiling, but most drove into the dashboard. She wobbled the cutter's tip and the hole widened, and next she was drilling through the drive internals. The car slowed smoothly to a stop, parking itself just short of the intersection. System failure, it said. Emergency backup engaged. Please depart the vehicle and await emergency assistance. The doors popped ajar on all sides. Ha! I was hoping for a real crash, and you have to cut the doors open. But she was already backing up out of the car. Zoo was speechless. Did I really do this? Timid little Zhu Zhang? Lena wheeled around the front of the car. We have a hill to climb. For Alfred Vaz, there had been various pieces of good news. He had completed his fake investigation of the Gen labs and provided Gunberg's clever analysts with evidence that would eventually lead them far away. And finally, Alice had collapsed. That had come very late, but it was more spectacular than Alfred had expected. Keiko's people claimed that DHS surveillance was blinded in chaos, and that chaos was unexplained good fortune to her and Gunberg. And for Alfred, it could mean complete success. Give him a few more minutes and his private research program would be safe, not only from Gunberg and Keiko, but also from the inevitable American investigations. And then things went very wrong. Mary Gu had found the Stooges. He had lost his one mech in the labs and also his fiber link to the Stooges. And now, Braun to Mitsuri Vaz. Mr. Rabbit has perpetrated our Milnet. It was a fantastic claim and manifestly true. For the last 10 minutes, there had been minor comm glitches, error retry packets happening a little too often. The statistics were well below the level of reasonable suspicion. But then in a grand gesture, typical of Rabbit's madness, the creature had sent 2 megabyte jumbograms straight through the Milnet and off the end of the fiber. Braun to Mitsuri Vaz. Just before we lost the fiber, it seemed the local Stooges intended on escape. How much time does that leave? Close message. Numerical estimates floated up. Time still, Stooges can reach 911, and time DHS responds. But Keiko's people had an idea. Mitsuri to Braun Vaz. For the moment, DHS is distracted, and I can be very crude. I can fool the Stooges into believing I'm the local police. Such a masquerade would mean hijacking a significant part of the local net. Within the highly regulated networks of the modern world, this was about as subtle as an infantry assault. DHS was truly in disarray. For several minutes, there was no manager level traffic. Alfred was aware of Keiko's masquerading as the California Highway Patrol. His own attention was on a number of tasks he didn't dare try while Alice Gong was still around. Gunberg's analysts were assessing how deeply Rabbit's intrusion had gone. Their conclusions were tagged a soothing green. Braun to Mitsuri Vaz. I wonder what Rabbit was doing, closed message. There were much more easy ways of betraying the operation than this. As far as the network analyst could tell, Rabbit had managed little more than to rattle the metaphorical doorknobs of their millnet. The psych people had their explanation. Rabbit was known for its childish ego. It simply couldn't pass up the chance to show off, hence the jumbogram. Such antics could not be taken as a sign of overall betrayal. After all, Rabbit was doing a magnificent job with the library riot. Some analysts had more paranoid theories. The current favorite was that Rabbit was China, and that would make tonight a perfect Keystone Cops comedy. All the great powers chasing after one another, but there were also nightmare speculations. Maybe Rabbit had fooled the network analysts and all the lesser paranoids. And after all, the jumbogram had been sent just before the fiber link was broken. Maybe Rabbit was a grand terrorist who had used the Alliance as its stooge, installing its own interests within the labs, a quick conversion of the entire establishment into a death factory. And there was the UpX launcher in the Zhengzhen area, what amounted to a delivery system. Alfred sighed to himself. In the long run, he feared Rabbit as much as the extreme paranoids did, but tonight, well, if they looked too closely, they might see Alfred's own operation lurking in the shadows. It was best to calm things down. Vaz to Braun Mitsuri. I'm with the Greens on this. Yes, Rabbit has exceeded our worst estimates, and he has broken into our operations millnet, but we have hard limits on his bandwidth, and my people still control the changes being made. Just look at the consistency checks. Short of having physical troops on the ground there, we own the MCOG area. Close message. Mitsuri to Braun Vaz. Well, we also have good control of the topside operation. No sign of Rabbit funny business. The important, close message, wait on message, pause. Red doubt was hemorrhaging across the analyst pool, spreading from a statistical analysis team at Moscow, Cape Town. There were some chaps who had been consistently right about the soybean futures plot. They had credibility, and they claimed that the views from the north side of Zhengzhen area were corrupt. Those were not views Alfred had subverted. For better or worse, his colleagues had discovered some other deception. Now, signals and stat people in all the analyst pools had precedence. 1,000 specialists who a second ago might have been looking at a dozen other problems were suddenly watching the same data. Computing resources shifted from a myriad drudge tasks and began correlating data from the accessible sensors in the labs. It was as if the Indo-European intelligence were an immense cat, suddenly come alert, listening and watching for a sign of its prey. Only one of the area cams was offline, but the others were subtly misregulated. The inconsistencies were scattered all across the area that the Alliance controlled, but analysis made the Moscow-Cape Town guess more and more of a certainty. A blotch of deception was moving into the Zhengzhen area at the speed of a fast walk. There! A fleeting glimpse of the goo child. The analyst pounced on the location and dredged two sets of footprints out of the lying silence. So Rabbit did have troops on the ground. Mitsuri to Braun Vaz. That damn bunny, we can't stop him. He just keeps coming and coming and coming. Close message. For a moment, there was no conversation, and then Braun to Mitsuri Vaz. I can stop him. I can pull the plug on Credit Suisse. There was another long pause. Yes, Gunberg's discovery that Rabbit depended on a single Apex certificate authority. All the power in the modern world, from flying the largest aircraft to moving bytes between components in a single processor, it all came down to the exchange of appropriate markers of trust. That's the blockchain, guys. As enforced by the secure hardware environment, SHE. And for as far as the top Rabbit's operations via billions of unknown paths, there was a single source, Credit Suisse, CA. Revoking that authority would disarm Rabbit and it would likely destroy the fellow's access to his own most personal files, leaving nothing but what the creature held in his natural mind, unless Rabbit really was an AI, in which case nothing would be left. But the collateral damage would be enormous. Shutting down a top-level certificate authority was a metaphorical weapon of mass destruction, and now it was all that was left to them. Braun to Mitsuri Vaz. Mr. Rabbit must be stopped. I have begun the proceedings. Credit Suisse will begin issuing global revocations in 15 seconds. Mitsuri to Braun Vaz. I'm sorry, Gunberg. 10% of the trust apparatus of Europe would slide into chaos in the next half hour. The aftershocks would rattle the world. Whatever else came out of their mission here, for Gunberg Braun, it was a career-ending failure. Another kind of failure threatened Alfred Vaz. Shooting down Rabbit had been one of his fondest hopes, but not just now. Alfred dipped back into the Gen viewpoints. Downing Rabbit had eliminated all of the slack from the schedule, and I need the time for my own cover-up. He was reduced to emergency measures. Alfred brought 2 more secret teams online. One would use the fruit fly scam to divert what was left of Rabbit. The other would destroy his lab within a lab, destroy Alfred's work of years. But they would also outship his secret lab's greatest prize through Gen's UpX launcher. For Alfred Vaz, some form of success was still possible. Gu, the eldest, and Gu, the youngest, hiked southward out of the Huertas cavern. Behind them, the shredded containers in the north entrance were swallowed by darkness. The light that traveled above them shone just a few yards in all directions. How far till we're in enemy territory, said Robert. Mary held up a finger to her lips, and she gestured, and silent messaged paraded across his vision. Mary to Robert. Your PDF says they only control a small part of Gen, but I bet they can hear a long ways. Stick with silent messaging, close message. Robert fumbled with the box in his belt. The key display helped, but for typing, it was tedious. All the tricks that Juan had taught him were nearly useless without epiphany. Robert to Mary. Okay. Mary walked in almost perfect silence, and Robert tried to imitate her. In fact, with Winston and the others gone, things were very quiet in her Huertas country. Maybe they were only as alone as the mysterious stranger had claimed, shielded from friends and enemies alike. Mary must have been reading as they walked. More Sming appeared. Robert, I didn't know about Alfred, closed message. It was curious that she didn't wonder about the mysterious stranger. He tapped a few cramped words, Robert to Mary. What can we do? Mary to Robert. Well, there's Mr. Smart Alec's list, closed message. She waved at the air, and a page of the stranger's PDF popped into view. Page 17. What you can do to defeat Alfred. First off, even I, your mysterious friend, am not sure exactly what Alfred is up to, but I am afire with curiosity. So here are some possibilities. Number 1, to blow up the biolabs, classic straightforward terrorism. But don't you think he went to rather a lot of trouble if that's all he wanted to do? It would be a gross underemployment of everyone's talent. If this is the scam, you will be the heroes of the day. My hands in disabling those little boxes you and your friends planted, but your fame will likely be posthumous. My condolences. 2, to sabotage some component of the labs, maybe in a way that won't become evident until much later disasters. This is almost as stupid as number 1. Number 3, to install, parentheses, or cover, some fiendishly clever man-in-the-middle software that gives Alfred de facto ownership of research done in that part of the lab that you, Robert, infested for him. That would be cool, and it is my personal favorite. See discussion of fruit flies in Chapter 3. Unfortunately for Alfred, this caper is so far blown that I doubt it will survive to audits that will surely come raining down. And in this case, you two can help by grabbing anything that Alfred has not yet hidden. Number 4, in case of failure of number 3, or perhaps this is the original plan, Alfred may take advantage of your cabal's efforts and outship biologically interesting material from the lab. Diagram of the pneumotube transport system. Picture of Gen's UpX launcher. To what end? Oh, the usual terrorist possibilities, but more likely something weird and interesting. I'm confident that I can identify such activity, and you, my loyal friends, can physically prevent the loading and outshipment. For the moment, we are all in the dark about this, but once you enter the perverted Gen area, I should be able to contact you again. Be careful, be quiet, and watch for me in your sky. Mary's words were overwriting the text even before Robert finished reading it. Mary to Robert, this guy is always so modest. Robert grinned, and then he read her message a second time, and he thought back all his conversations with Sharif to the mystery of the true Sharif and the stranger Sharif and the sci-fi Sharif. Oh my God. Robert to Mary, how much of Sharif was you? She glanced up at him, and for an instant, her intensity was transformed into a dazzling smile. Mary to Robert, I'm not sure. Sometimes we were all mixed together with the real Zulfi, and that was almost fun, hearing what the others asked and what you answered. But way too often, I was frozen out, and it was just Mr. Smart Aleck. Robert to Mary, the mysterious stranger, closed message. Mary to Robert, do you really call him that? Why? Closed message. Robert to Mary, yes. Because of the magic he promised, but he didn't type that out. Mary to Robert, well, I think he's nothing without us. Closed message. Everything was still dark beyond their little pool of light, but now the walls were closer. They were almost back to the sky tunnel. Robert to Mary, what will your mom and dad get here? Kids spying on family members and reporting to the government. That feature of tyranny is so much simpler when the family itself is mainly government agents. Mary to Robert, I don't know. I didn't tell them. Where is tyranny when you need it? For a moment, Robert couldn't think of anything to say. Robert to Mary, but why? Mary stopped for a second, looked up at him with that patented stubborn stare. Mary to Robert, because you're my grandfather. I knew you never meant to hurt me. I knew you must be hurting inside. I knew Bob must be wrong about you. I figured if I could help you out from a different direction, you'd get better. And you did get better, didn't you? Close message. Robert managed a nod. Mary turned and marched on. Mary to Robert, but I messed up. I thought Smart Aleck was all I had to worry about wherever you broke in, and then I thought there'd be instant alarms, and me and Juan being here might make things better for you. And now Juan is closed message. She hesitated and then reached out to grasp his hand. Mary to Robert, Juan is hurt, bad, closed message. Her hand trapped his fingers. No matter, Robert had no sensible reply except to squeeze back. Mary to Robert, but Dr. Zhang is out there and she'll call for help, and Mr. Blount should be calling the real 911 by now. And meantime, it's up to you and me down here. There were surprises in almost every one of Mary's sentences, and if he could have spoken aloud or typed freely, he would have asked about 100 questions. Juan, Zhang, Mary, so many friends doing so much to save an incompetent old fool and his fellow fools. The ground bounced elastically against their feet. They were passing through the sky tunnel back into Gen territory. All right, so that's it for tonight. Next up will be chapter 28, the animal model, and we're doing pretty good. We're got only about that much more to go. So I think that's maybe 2 or 3 nights worth of reading. And then I'm thinking afterwards, because this is a little bit dry, even though it's important and it's helped me a lot to understand, to revisit it. I'm thinking I might do Wrinkle in Time next because I need a little bit of a pick-me-up. So anyway, thanks for joining in. I hope my introduction made sense to everybody. And till next time.